Like many, I grew up loving dinosaurs, so naturally a Jurassic Park obsession would follow. Despite this film coming out a long time before I was born, I did grow up watching it a lot, so I was very excited to see that they brought it back for a soft reboot with Jurassic World. But now this new trilogy has concluded with the latest edition of Jurassic World Dominion, which saw our new cast meet up with the OG cast for one final showdown. And so like we do on this channel, I'm going to take all 6 Jurassic Park / Jurassic World movies and rank them from worst to best. If you feel like it, let me know what your ranking is down below. I'm interested to see, especially where this new movie ranks, because I feel like it's going to be very divisive with some people. But without further ado, let's get into my ranking of all Jurassic Park and Jurassic World movies. I know early reviews haven't been great for this film, but as of now, I don't actually know if this is an agreeable pick or if I'm being controversial here, but after a lot of thinking, I decided to put the newly released Jurassic World Dominion in last place. I know that this new trilogy isn't taking a more serious approach like the previous one. I'm fine for them to lean into the sillier side of things in this trilogy, but they do that way too much in this film. Fallen Kingdom left off in an interesting place where they could devote an entire movie to dinosaurs living on the mainland amongst us. A critic whose reviews I read made an interesting point that they could have made this like a Dawn of the Planet of the Apes type of movie where humanity is not the same and is slowly dying off. I thought that would be an interesting way of doing things. But instead of capitalizing on that potential, they instead put that to the side and focus on perhaps the franchise's worst plotline with Clone Girl Maisie. And they don't just focus on it, they pretty much put it in the main spotlight and make it the main story. But even with that plotline, the whole film just feels very familiar in the sense that it replays old plot lines, and not in the way only some of the times is it trying to call back to previous films, but genuinely there are some plot lines which play out the same way as others, just with a different skin on top. You would have thought, okay, after Fallen Kingdom's backlash with this clone girl plotline, they'll kind of push it to the side. As I mentioned, they put it in the spotlight and they dive deeper into it and add even stupider details to it, which, no joke, had me and my brother face palming right next to each other in the cinema. Because that's such a main part of this film, it doesn't feel like a Jurassic Park or Jurassic World film at all. It feels very, very different. If anything, it feels like a spy movie in some aspects, as it has these plot to try and rescue this girl, this globe-trotting plot, and also infiltrating a facility with a sprinkle of dinosaurs. But to be honest, the dinosaur part of things, yes, there were some cool action scenes and the CGI and practical effects were good. For the most part, I felt like we'd seen a lot of these action sequences before. I won't dive into details, whether that's with the same dinosaurs or just the way things play out. So much to talk about with this film, but with the returning cast members, obviously it's great to see them, and the way they're portrayed and written, they do feel like natural continuations of those characters. But it didn't feel all that special, to be honest. Like, yeah, it brought a smile to my face, but it didn't have the same payoff as something like the Peter Parkers returning or any other sort of return of legacy characters. But one thing which I did notice, which no one's really saying, is when all the characters team up, you know, the Jurassic Park characters and the Jurassic World characters, it really highlights how these new characters have no personality other than the stereotypes and cliches. So I just thought that was pretty funny, because once they all team up together, it's the old cast that's still the show. There are never really any tense moments I found in this film, as I felt too reliant on suspension of disbelief. And yes, I know this is a film franchise which is dealing with dinosaurs. You can go about it in a way which does feel somewhat realistic. Here, it was absolutely ridiculous. This was one of my most anticipated films of the year, but it's the worst in the franchise for me. I was excited for Jurassic World Dominion, and I never thought it would be fighting for its place to stay above Jurassic Park 3, but I didn't even manage to, because I think genuinely this is a slightly better overall film. Where my struggle with this film was I couldn't really find any positives about it, but then its negatives weren't as consistently poor as Jurassic World Dominion's, so I feel like narrowly this one stays above it, and for the first time in my life isn't the worst of the franchise. The reason this isn't as poor as Jurassic World Dominion though is because its storyline is relatively simple. The stuff around it is what makes it pretty poor, and one which is very noticeable is how cheap the film looks, and I don't think it had a small budget at all. It's not a TV movie. It was theatrically released, but I feel like they may have devoted all their funds into getting Sam Neill to return and the practical effects for the dinosaurs, because overall everything looked cheap. And besides that, the film is riddled with repetitiveness. There's an overuse of characters running away from dinosaurs only for the sake of them to move them across the island, and it was so repetitive where they'd run away from the dinosaurs and bump into a coincidence which would move the storyline along. It is clear Sam Neill only really returned to get a paycheck, because although he's not poor in the film, the script doesn't really allow him to do much, but you can tell he's not putting any passion into it. I don't really blame him when there's a raptor talking to him in his sleep. But funny enough, he does stand out as the best character, maybe because we know him from Jurassic Park, but also because all the other characters are so poorly written. They try and weave in this plot line about this divorce of these two side characters who are very unlikable, and you just don't care about them, and you don't really care if they end up getting back together after this. I know that might sound horrible. It seems like minimal effort was put into Jurassic Park 3 for the sake of making it a trilogy. It is the shortest film of the franchise by a solid half an hour, I believe. And by the time we reach the end, it feels like it hasn't even got going because it's so repetitive and the way it stumbles onto each different scene. Jurassic World Fallen Kingdom really does play out similarly to Jurassic Park The Lost World. Well, we'll talk about that film in a bit. For the first part, this film is actually more enjoyable with rescuing the dinosaurs off the island. But due to its laughably bad and corny second half or final act, this one is actually lower than it, even though I'd probably rewatch this film more than The Lost World, and you'll find out why. And this is like a classic blockbuster film, cutting corners for the sake of big action scenes. And yes, you can enjoy those scenes, but you have to remember how they got to them, and that's what prevents me from putting this film higher up on the list. The film does continue off where Jurassic World left off by giving our characters no development or any traits other than the stereotypical ones, and not to mention keeping up with some of the corniest villains of the franchise. You may glance at this film quickly and think it's pretty cohesive, but when you watch through it and you see all these small details where it cuts corners, you can accept one or two, but when it does it so much, it becomes really noticeable, and you think about how they got to this final part of the film and realize all the unrealistic things they had to do to get there. On the story level, the first half of this film's absurdity plays into its hands and delivers quite a fun rescue mission and some genuinely good scenes, to be honest. However, as I mentioned, the film does lose me and many people when it moves into its second half, as it becomes very cartoonish and certain plot lines are unnecessarily dumb, and I think we all know which one I'm talking about. If you're someone who likes big blockbuster movies with very little logic involved, this might be one of your favourite of the franchise, but for me personally, who has to take these things into account, Jurassic World Fallen Kingdom sits comfortably in this spot. I don't really like The Lost World Jurassic Park all that much, to be honest, but I think it does take a fairly grounded approach, especially compared to all the other films that are lower down on this list. So for the sake of that, I have to put it in this position, because at the end of the day, other than the ridiculous gymnastics scene with the raptors, this film doesn't really commit any horrific or unforgivable sins. Yes, it may have some corny villains, but things play out how you'd expect things to play out with a film of this type, and I can't really slate it for that, but the reason why I don't like it all that much is because it's just very, very boring, especially after the excitement of the previous film. And where I said that Fallen Kingdom is more rewatchable than this film is because, yes, it is fun to watch even if you can ignore all lapses in logic, but this one is a more grounded and realistic film dealing with this sort of subject matter. Jeff Goldblum continues his charismatic performance as Ian Malcolm. However, having him in the lead is nowhere near as strong as having him on the side, and as he is the lead, he has to tackle more responsibility, so there isn't as much time for his quirkiness. But following on from Jurassic Park, The Lost World just lacks the characters, the chemistry around, the charisma, and ultimately it is pretty forgettable. I know people do enjoy this film and enjoy it a lot more than I do, but for me, I found it a very dull and boring watch, but for the sake of its realism, I had it this high up on the list. Jurassic World gets a lot of hate, and for the most part I don't actually see where it comes from. Yes, there are many inconsistencies which I'll talk about, but did you want them to do a retreading of the first film? I think it's a great idea that they actually open up the park, because that would make sense in real life, and having the dinosaurs escape with people on the island just makes things a little more interesting. And I liked how Jurassic World actually showed you around the park. It didn't just imply that there's all these things. It genuinely showed you the rides, the attractions, and I thought they were all pretty cool. That combined with the action scenes and the CGI are the most impressive part of this film, but I do understand where people do have some complaints, because I do as well. Jurassic Park fell more under horror action, and rewatching the trailer for this film, the first trailer, it gave off a horror vibe, and it never really leaned into that too much here. It was very much a big action blockbuster, which did allow for a lot of fun to happen, but for die-hard fans, even though I'm a die-hard fan, the absence of horror may upset you. I've mentioned the shortcut or the cutting corners that these Jurassic World films have done, and these ones are noticeable in small amounts, and it doesn't do them as many times as the others, so it is forgivable here, even though it's very obvious with some decisions, and plus the action sequences and scenarios it leads to are pretty fun. Although overall I think this film does a good job, it doesn't really compare to the original because of the cutting corners it has to take, and doesn't feel as cohesive and realistic in the sense. I know we're talking about dinosaurs, as I said, but still. And another part which dampens this film's quality compared to that film is the characters. I've mentioned it in this video before. They have no personality traits other than the cliches, and just seeing them played out, I didn't really care too much about it. There is a lot of fun with this film if you can turn off your brain for a little bit and ignore a few of the lapses in logic. It is a lot easier to ignore the lapses in logic in this film compared to the other Jurassic World films that came after it, so that's why I'm saying you can turn your brain off for this one for a little bit and have a lot of fun, because at the end of the day, it was more like a film than those previous ones that came out. What more needs to be said? If you came into this video thinking there was going to be a #1 pick other than this film, then I don't know why you clicked on this video. When talking about absolute classics, Jurassic Park falls into the category, and it's probably one of the most famous as well. Led by a charismatic cast, Jurassic Park blends sci-fi, action, adventure with horror, whilst also finding time to be funny. The creative premise allows for so many things to happen, especially when things go wrong. Dinosaurs are the main focus of this film, of course, and I hadn't rewatched this film in a long time, so I was worried to see how the effects would hold up, but I know there was a lot of practical effects used, and of course they were brilliant. What I was very impressed with was the CGI, because for its time, it looked close enough to flawless. I've watched a lot of films from the 90s or even earlier, and when they have used CGI for action scenes with monsters or something like that, it can take me a little bit out of it, but I was very much feeling the tension of each scene with these dinosaurs, even when they were CGI. And to be honest, to this day, I'm still stunned at how good it looks for its age. There are maybe a few loose ends or lapses in logic, nowhere near the amount the Jurassic World trilogy commits, so they can be forgiven, although maybe a little bit annoying at times. I believe Jurassic Park is the best dinosaur movie to date, and I don't know if anything's going to top it. I'm slowly watching through Spielberg's filmography, and as it stands, this is maybe my first or second pick of his films. As I said, haven't watched them all. I just love everything about this film, from the characters to the plot line, just the environment and how this film plays out. Even the two annoying characters, the two kids, I enjoyed them and seeing them on screen because they're just part of this film. Nostalgia definitely plays a huge part in my enjoyment of this film, but even if I strip that away, it is still leagues above the next film in this list. So I can confidently say Jurassic Park is the best Jurassic Park film. So that was my ranking of all 6 Jurassic Park movies. Please let me know what yours is down below, as I said, and while you're there, please like and subscribe if you haven't already. It would really mean a lot. I've recently started my own TikTok where I post individual movie reviews and even very short edits of these videos where I rank the films. So if you're interested in checking that out, I'll leave a link in the description for you, along with my Letterboxd where I review all my movies. So you may even get to see my thoughts on them before my videos come out. But anyways, as I said, thank you so much for watching. I really hope you enjoyed the video, and I hope to see you in my next one.